We're going to go write some code right now, because that's more fun. OK, so does everyone's code look, when you refresh your view, does it look like this still? It should still look like this, unless you've been creating an Angular app unless you've been creating a backbone app, in which case it would look very different. OK, anyway, right. So we're going to do, what we want to do for the app that we're going to write today is going to be a weather application. And that weather application is going to, when we load this page, we're going to type in a city that we're interested in. And then we're going to load the weather for that. And then alongside of that, we're going to look up businesses we're going to look up businesses from the Yelp API so we can see what weather it is in the city that we're interested in. And we can look for businesses that are close by to that city. Ooh, it's a new homepage. OK. This will demonstrate pretty much all the components that we want to build for our Angular app, as well as provide a nice base for testing for things that we'll actually do in production when we write Angular applications. OK, so lady on the end, what is your name on this in the second row? Avi? Pavi? P-A-V-I? Awesome. I thought you were gonna be like, no, it's OK, right. So Pavi, the first thing we'll have a view, or we want to allow the user to type in a city, right? So knowing what you know about Angular thus far, what would you suggest that we do to allow the user to type something in that gives us a city?
I would have an input control page.
Yep, we would have an input. Let's go to our index. I'll type it as we're saying it. First, let's go ahead. We'll delete all that real quick. And let's just give it a row. We'll say that it's 9. OK, cool. So we have an.
You want to type the name of the city?
No, so we want to allow the user to type something in, right? Like we want to allow the user to type in a city like San Francisco or Phoenix, Arizona, or London, UK, or right. So we want to allow the user to type something in. So what would we do to do that?
So do you have a model attribute?
We can create one for sure. Yeah, the world is your oyster.
Add an input with ng model set some city.
Yeah, let's just call it city. OK. And then let's also add a class real quick. This is called form control, I think, in Bootstrap. Yeah, that's good. And then let's also add if you're not familiar, the class names that I'm typing out are Bootstrap class names. So if you type it, it should look the same as mine. And then we probably want like a submit button, right? That would be my guess. OK. So we have the submit button, but we don't have a form wrapping around it. We don't need a form if we don't want to, but I kind of like the idea that you can type something in and then press enter. So I am going to add a form element. I hope you don't mind, Pavi. OK. OK, so this isn't gonna work quite yet. Can anyone tell me why? Oh, yeah, that's true. That was just but besides that. Yeah. Yes, it's not going to work because we don't have a scope on it. We haven't defined an action. Also, That's true. City's not going to evaluate, but it doesn't matter for the time being. It's okay if it evaluates to nothing. But let's say that we want to type a city in here, right? Let's say San Francisco. We don't have anything saying, hey, if we press enter, it's going to go, or go isn't bound to anything, right? So we can do this. We can, what was your name again? I totally forgot. Sean. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Sean, knowing what you know about Angular, how would we add an action to when you click on the submit button?
We're going to add ng-click
Yep.
to button.
And then probably want to call it some meaningful method that says, hey, go search. Or
Fetch city or something.
yeah, let's call it FetchData. How's that? Okay. Cool. So the one thing about this, about the way that we've defined this, let's go add a note here. Input city. That's kind of gross. Oh well. So the one thing about this is if we press enter, we're not going to get that. We're not going to get that nice thing that happens when you have a user who presses enter. Instead, they're going to have to say go. They have to click on the go button. Actually, we'll do that in just 1 second. OK, so now it's not going to work. Whoever said we haven't defined the scope, who was that? Who said that? Yeah, what was your name?
Arkady.
What is it?
Arkady.
Arkady? A-R-C-A-D-I-A.
A-R-K-A-D-Y.
Cool, Arkady. That is a cool name. So how, bless you, how do we define a scope for this?
Go to home controller
Yep.
or create a new controller.
We can either use the home controller or we can create a new controller. Because I'm lazy, let's just use the home controller. OK, so let's go to our home controller. And we're not really using any of this anymore, so let's take that out. So now our home controller is empty. So we have a method that is not defined, right? That method called FetchData. Dot FetchData equals function. Cool. So this FetchData function is going to get called whenever we click on that button, right? So let's just make a little console log note. It does fetch data called and puts that into our console so we can see that that is actually running. Excuse me. OK, so if we go here and we refresh our page and we click on this button, we'll see that fetch data gets called. Hooray, the hookup worked. However, if we press enter, oh, that does work. That's funny. It's because it's type submit. Yes, cool. So now what we actually want to do is we want to call against it. When we run our fetch data, we want to call against that city, right? So how do we get access to that city?
We need to bind the
Scope.city.
Yeah, it's on scope.city, and we bound it already with ng model right here.
Is anyone having trouble getting that fetch data button to work?
So we've bound it already using that input field like this. Does everyone's?
We need to explicitly write scope.city.
Yes, you need to explicitly call scope.city. So now we can see that fetch data is called with San Francisco. Does that work for everybody? Yep.
No, I meant do we need to initialize the scope?
We don't need to initialize it. It will initially be undefined. If you wanted to have a city, you would put that in the constructor function like that. So if you refresh the page, it'll already auto-populate as San Francisco. By the way, do you notice that? It's bidirectional. We set city equals to San Francisco when I refresh the page, and immediately the input field populated with the value of that, of city, which is San Francisco. Ooh, okay. Thank you for whoever said that. Okay. One last thing, if we want for more complex forms and for if you don't have a type submit on your button and you don't have a form, I'm sorry, if you don't have a type submit on your button and you forget that, a more canonical way to do a form would be by using the NGSubmit directive on the form itself and that call, and we would set the action to get called when the button gets set, which means that we can erase this ngClick here. So all I do is I moved ngClick off of the button element and I added NGSubmit to the form, and it will work as well. If we come here and refresh the page, San Francisco still works, and I press enter, and now, hooray. Is anyone having trouble getting that to work?
You scan the code.
This code? Okay. All right.
The reason why you're using single quotes for all the Angular stuff and then double quotes for all the HTML attributes.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Was that a question?
So, why do you have like single quotes for some of the Angular attributes versus
Right.
double quotes for the HTML?
So anytime that I'm doing JavaScript, because of strict mode, I'm used to, although this one was not true to that, I'm used to using single quotes for JavaScript. It doesn't matter in HTML. The browser renders single quotes and double quotes the exact same.
I was just wondering why you're doing that.
Just bad habit? Good habit? Habit? Attribute. Okay. Okay, cool. So now we have our input ready to go. So now we can move on to actually fetching data. Okay, so we can't really have a weather application if we don't have any weather. How do we get weather? Oh, I forgot to mention at the top of this, we're not using jQuery. You can use jQuery if you want to alongside of Angular. You don't need it. I don't think in any one of my production applications I've used jQuery, with the exception of jQuery with Bootstrap. But you don't need it. So we're not using it. Notice we didn't load it. Shifty eyes. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to build part one of our application, if the internet will work with us, is we're going to build this. Although it might look a little bit different. Wow, it's 62 degrees outside? That's cold. Huh. Touche, my good friend. Did you say that? Who said that?
I did.
Oh, yes. I was looking at you. Touche. Okay. So we are going to build something like this. The code might not look, or it might not look this pretty, although we can spend some time on that if you want to. Right. So the way we do that is we use the $HTTP service, and this $HTTP service is built in from Angular, so we don't have to do anything special with it. We don't have to do anything special to get it. So the $HTTP service is simply just a wrapper around the native XML request object. That slide is wrong. It's not XML HTTP request. It's request object. Right. So one thing about HTTP requests or AJAX requests is that they are asynchronous. And that's good. We want them to be asynchronous because if our page is blocked waiting for something to come back, if our page is blocked waiting for something to come back that may never come back, let's say you're traveling at 65 miles an hour and you're running through a tunnel and you're in Texas and your service is really terrible, you might not ever come back, or that remote server might be down, open weather map might be dead. If that never comes back and we have a blocked website, we have a blocked application waiting for that request to come back, it's probably going to look like it's broken. So rather than having a broken web app, we have an asynchronous web app. The issue is that asynchronicity introduces complexity in our code. So because we don't have sequential steps happening inside of our code, we have to deal with this. We have to work with asynchronicity. We have to work with that asynchronicity. I just like saying the word asynchronicity. Okay. So how do we deal with this? If you've used something like Angular before, if you've used something like jQuery before, that's the word I was looking for, you've probably done this with callbacks. Angular uses something called promises. What's a promise, you might say, if you don't know what a promise already is? Well, here's a short introduction to promises, as the title suggests. Okay, so if you've used jQuery before, like this, you might have used the .ajax function, or the .jsonp function, or the .get function, or the .insert HTTP method here function. When you're using a function like this, if you're not using the jQuery promises, which is actually kind of nice, if you're using a function like this, you're passing in a callback function. If you want a callback function to run when the AJAX is successful between it's a 200 code between 200 and 299, then you would pass in a success function, and that success function would get called by jQuery when that asynchronous HTTP request comes back. If you want to handle the error, then you would pass in the error function. It's pretty simple, right? Totally simple. Except when you get into callback hell. What I mean when I say callback hell is the second that you start adding a second function, let's say you make a request and you want to make another request based on the result of that first request. An example of this might be you have a type ahead function, or you have a type ahead directive, or you have a type ahead functionality where you're like, okay, I'm looking for cities. And so we start typing in the city San, and a bunch of things come down with San Francisco, and you want to say, okay, cool, I'm going to check out San Francisco. You press enter. That makes a request out to say, hey, is this a valid city? Cool, if it comes back and says this is a valid city, then you want to make a request based on that validity to come back. Okay, you guys get it, right? And then you make another request that says, okay, give me the weather for that, and also when that request comes back, make another request for Yelp. That's 4 requests. Is that 4? Did I miscount? I think that's 4. That's 4 requests nope, 3 requests that go out, right? So that's 3, if we're using callbacks, that's 3 levels of callbacks. What happens if one of those requests doesn't come back as a 200 to 299? What if one fails? Capturing that error is really hard. If you're using callbacks, I promise you, if you've done this before, you likely have done this before, callbacks are hard. And then you get this thing called callback hell and the mysterious missing error, mysteriously disappearing error. Okay, that the Hardy Boys need to come and help find that. Okay. Rather than passing a callback, another way to handle this is by using promises. So rather than say you handing the function to a function call, you can define a function on a resulting object. It's called a deferred object. You can define a function on a deferred object that gets called when the function is done running. Yes. So instead of us passing a function in, we can take the object that we get back from a function that passes back a promise, and we can define our functionality on top of that. So for instance, or not for instance, this is what a promise API might look like. This is the promise API from Angular. This is how you interact with promises. So if you have a promise, when you get a promise, if you want to run something when there's no errors that have occurred, when there are no errors that have occurred, you would call the .then function on that promise and define functionality that happens. And then if you want to call a function to capture an error, you call the catch method. So you catch that error. And then if you want to run a function regardless of anything else, you call the finally function and be done with it. Cool.
Catch or error?
This is catch. Okay, so it allows us to turn something right. So I don't know why I said $HTTP. That should be $.ajax or $get. But pretend that's not there, and it's $.get. Okay. So this is how you'd pass in like a callback function to something like jQuery, right? Like you pass in one function. If you pass in a second, that's how the error gets handled. It allows us to turn that into this, where you have this object, and we're calling the .then object. We're calling the .then method on that object, and then we're calling the .catch method on that object as well, because .then returns self, .catch returns self too.
So do you have nested .thens?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, you do have nested thens, but it's so you do get nesting like you might with callbacks, but there's a couple ways you can handle it. One of the benefits is that promises have a lot better semantics around like error handling versus like callbacks. There's like very precise semantics about what will happen when you get errors. So even if you have nested .thens, it's still a little bit easier to handle. And then also you can do like promise chains, which I'll talk about a little bit later.
Actually, right there.
Yeah, which helps with like nesting.
I got a question.
Yes.
Is there an equivalent of, like with the jQuery deferreds, you've got a $.when, you can just pass the list of promises?
There is $q.when works as well, or if you want to set up a wait for a bunch of promises, you do $q.all and pass an array. Yes, promises are built in Angular, so using Angular, you're going to be really cozy with promises. One of the nice things about using Angular with promises is the fact that you don't have to do anything different than just set up your call, set up your HTTP call. So we don't have to set up a timer that checks to see if that promise is done. All we have to do, Angular will take care of that. All we have to do is set up the promise chain to work the way we expect it. Okay, and we can use things like promise chains. This is what Nate was referencing just a minute ago, where a promise chain, we could set up a promise chain, for instance, in the scenario where we want to do a type ahead. We want to we'll set up a promise chain so that inside of our controller, we only have one function that gets called, and that function itself is dependent, sets up its own dependencies on success and errors. Okay. So using our $HTTP, in order to use it, we need to do what to get it inside of the controller? Who have I not called on yet? What? Okay, fine. I'll call on you. What do we have to do?
Injection?
Yeah, we have to inject it. The way we inject it is we just add it to the function, right? Because Angular will take care of annotating that function for us. Okay, cool. Yeah. So for instance, in our getWeather function, we might have our function might look something like this, and what we would end up doing inside of this function is returning, or we don't even have to return actually, is call the $HTTP as a method. Then we pass in our configuration to how we want to make that call. And then we use the .then, and when that then comes back, then we can set that variable on the scope, just like that. Okay, let's do this now. So, what? Oh, okay. We'll type it right now. Huzzah. Okay, so the first thing that we have to do is, what was your name? Yes. Sean. Cool. So the first thing we have to do is what again? Whoops. So
the injection or HTTP.
yeah, so we want to inject HTTP into our controller. Let's make this a little nicer. There. So now we have access to the $HTTP. Okay, so if we look inside the gist, there's a file called URL, and this file called URL is simply just, I wrote that there so we could copy and paste it. So just go grab the weather URL from there and paste that into our controller right here. Okay. Do you guys all know what CORS is? You guys know what CORS is? CORS? Yeah. Yep. So our browsers won't allow us to make requests. Is lunch ready? Haha, I totally guessed it. Okay.
So lunch is being held second floor at the elevators are towards the back of the banking hall, leading to the main entrance. So just proceed all the way to the back, make a left, and security will let you in. So you guys, if you're ready to go down, that would be awesome.
Not quite yet. Almost.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Can you guys hang on for like 10 more minutes? Okay. So browsers won't allow us to make requests across origins, and this is really good. It's for security purposes. Like we don't want to type in our password into a page, and that password and that page says, "Oh, cool! Now I have your username and password. I'm going to send it onto my malicious backend," and then you send that. Then all of a sudden, I mean that's good, right? You don't. Browsers won't allow us to do this. So there's a couple ways to get around it. One of those is CORS. CORS stands for cross-origin resource sharing. One of the things about CORS is the backend has to be set up to handle CORS. CORS works by using some things called pre-flight option requests. If you read about CORS, you'll read about that. It's just a little dance that your browser does, that modern browsers do with backends. If there is no options request that comes back in that pre-flight, if it comes back, then it won't work, et cetera, et cetera. So another way that we can handle cross-origin resource sharing is by using something called JSONP. What JSONP does is it simply takes the JSON, a server that handles JSONP would take that JSON and wrap it in a callback, as we'll see in just a minute. It'll wrap it in a callback so it looks as though we get this cross-origin request to work. JSONP only works with GET requests. We'll look at that in a second. I know that probably sounded like a mouthful, but we'll show you how that works in one sec. This is my robot hands. Okay, cool. So with that being said, in order to talk to openweathermap.org, which is where we're going to get our weather from, in order to talk to that, because it's not set up to use CORS, we're going to use JSONP. So the way that we use JSONP is we're going to use the $HTTP method that we injected in, and we're going to pass in an HTTP configuration object. As I said before, we're going to use JSONP to make that request. We can pass in this method option, we can pass in get, we can pass in post, we can pass in head, we can pass in options. All those are available to us. Post, we can do put, we can do delete, stuff like that, right? All the HTTP methods. In this case, we're going to use JSONP. And then we are going to pass, oh, I'm sorry. So there are two methods that are required in our configuration object, or two options that are required. We have a method and a URL. Those are the absolute required ones. So we're going to pass in the weather URL. And notice at the end of this weather URL, we have a queue. And this queue is like, it's just like if you're making a Google request. It's a query that we're going to make. Excuse me. Oh, that's the jet lag. We're going to pass in to this URL, we're going to pass in a queue. In this case, we're simply just going to query the city that we're calling. So we have access to that city using $scope.city, just like that. OK, I also want to make a note that, right, actually, let's go to lunch. We'll come back and deal with this when we get back.